My estranged mother just offered to sign over her apartment to me for free. I'm the son she barely raised. I don't know what to do. I've been staring at my phone for 3 days. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know because I checked afterward, the way you check the specifics of a car accident. You need the details to prove it happened. My name is Marcus. I'm 44 years old. I live in Richmond, Virginia, in a 3-bedroom colonial I bought 6 years ago with money my father helped me save. I'm a project manager for a mid-size construction firm. I have a 12-year-old daughter named Isla, shared custody with my ex-wife Danielle, and a life that functions. That's the word I use. Functions. Not thrives, not sparkles. Functions. And 3 days ago, my mother, Gloria Pace, a woman who has spoken to me maybe 200 times in my adult life, a woman I haven't seen face-to-face in over 3 years, called me on a Tuesday evening at 7:14 p.m. and said, in a voice as flat and undamaged as a frozen lake, "Marcus, I want to transfer the apartment to you. The one on Birch Street. I'll cover the legal costs. You just need to sign." No preamble. No, how are you? No, I know it's been a while. Just the offer, laid out like a zoning permit. I said, "What?" She said, "You heard me." And that, read it, is the most generous thing my mother has ever said to me in 44 years of being alive. Let me go back. My parents were never married. They were together for about 5 years, long enough to produce me, short enough that I have almost no memories of them in the same room. My father, Leonard Dale, was a pipefitter who worked for the city of Richmond for 31 years. He was a quiet man, not demonstrative, not poetic, but present. He showed up. Every school play, every baseball game, every awkward father-son conversation about puberty that made us both want to crawl under the porch. He was there. My mother was something else entirely. Gloria Pace grew up in Petersburg, about 25 miles south of Richmond. Her own childhood was, from what I've pieced together, brutal. Her father drank. Her mother worked double shifts at a laundry facility and came home too tired to do anything but sleep. Gloria learned early that love was a resource that ran out, and she carried that lesson like a suitcase she never unpacked. When my parents split, I was 4. There was no custody battle because there was no battle to fight. Gloria simply receded. She didn't abandon me in any dramatic, cinematic way. She paid her portion of support, mostly on time. She showed up for a birthday here and there. She remembered Christmas roughly every other year. But she never fought for weekends. She never called to ask about my day. She never said, "I love you." Not once, not ever, not in any form I could recognize. My father raised me. He taught me to drive, to cook scrambled eggs, to file taxes, to shake hands firmly but not aggressively. When I got into Virginia Commonwealth University, he cried at the kitchen table and then pretended he hadn't. When I got married at 28, he walked me through my vows the night before, sitting on his back porch with 2 bottles of Yingling, and told me, "Marriage is just showing up, son. Every day. Even the days you don't want to." He died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. After the service, Gloria came. She stood at the back of the church in a dark blue dress I'd never seen, and when I walked past her in the receiving line, she touched my arm, just the lightest brush of her fingers against my suit sleeve, and said, "Leonard was a good man." That was it. That was her eulogy for the man who raised her son. I didn't cry about it then. I cried about it 3 weeks later, alone in my car in the parking lot of a Wawa, eating a hoagie I couldn't taste. So when Gloria called on Tuesday and offered me the apartment, a 2-bedroom unit in a small complex off Birch Street in the Fan District, a place she'd owned outright for over 20 years, I didn't know how to respond. Not because the offer was complicated legally. It's straightforward, quitclaim deed, notarized signatures, filing with the city. I've handled more complex paperwork for kitchen renovations. I didn't know how to respond because I have spent my entire life building an identity around one foundational truth. My father gave me everything. My mother gave me nothing. That's not self-pity. That's architecture. That's the load-bearing wall of who I am. And now my mother was handing me a piece of real estate worth, I looked it up, somewhere between $280,000 and $310,000, and I could feel that wall starting to crack. I told her I'd think about it. She said, "Fine," and hung up. Update 1. 1 week later. I called my cousin Rena, Gloria's sister's daughter, the closest thing I have to a translator for my mother's behavior. Rena lives in Norfolk and works as a dental hygienist. She's 6 years older than me and has always been the family diplomat, the one who remembers everyone's birthday, who texts, "thinking of you," during hurricanes, who somehow maintains relationships with people the rest of us have written off. She's been talking about it for a while, Rena told me over the phone. I was sitting on my back deck, watching Isla do cartwheels in the yard, and trying to reconcile the image of my daughter's joy with the heaviness in my chest. Define a while, I said. Since Leonard passed. Maybe before that, even. She brought it up at Aunt Dot's 70th. Said she wanted to make sure you had something from her. Something from her, I repeated, and the words tasted strange, like a food I'd never tried. Marcus. I know she wasn't. I know she didn't do right by you. Nobody in this family pretends otherwise. But she's getting older. She had that knee surgery last year, and I think it scared her. She's been going through her finances, getting things in order. The apartment is the biggest asset she has, and she wants you to have it. Why doesn't she just say that? Rena laughed, not unkindly. Because she's Gloria. She doesn't explain herself. She just does things and expects you to figure out the rest. I asked Rena if there were strings attached. Hidden debts on the property. Tax liens. A reverse mortgage I'd inherit like a landmine. Nothing like that, Rena said. She owns it clean. Has for years. She rents it out to a young couple. I think they pay around $1,400 a month. She's been living off that plus her Social Security and a small pension from the school district. My mother worked as a cafeteria aide for Richmond Public Schools for 22 years. I didn't know she had a pension. There are, I realized, vast categories of facts about my mother that I simply do not possess. What does she live on if she gives me the apartment income? I asked. She's been looking at senior housing. One of those subsidized places out near Short Pump. She says she doesn't need the space anymore and the maintenance is getting to be too much. Something shifted in my chest when Rena said that. Not warmth, exactly. More like the sensation of ice beginning to fracture. Not melting, not yet, but developing those thin, branching cracks that precede collapse. I told Rena I still needed to think about it. She said she understood. Then she said something that stayed with me. Marcus, your mama doesn't know how to love in words. She never learned. But this apartment, this might be the only language she has left. Update 2. 2 weeks later. I did what any reasonable adult does when confronted with an emotionally overwhelming financial decision. I consulted a lawyer. Ellen Yates is a real estate attorney in Henrico County. She's also a friend of a friend who gave me her "don't tell anyone" rate of $175 an hour. I sat in her office on a Wednesday morning, took a half day from work, and laid out the situation. Legally, this is clean, Ellen said, flipping through the property records I'd pulled from the city assessor's website. No liens, no encumbrances, no outstanding judgments. Your mother owns the property free and clear. A quitclaim deed transfer from parent to child is straightforward. You'd file with the Richmond Circuit Court, pay the recording fees, maybe $50 to $80, and that's it. What about taxes? I asked. Virginia doesn't have a gift tax at the state level. Federally, the lifetime gift tax exemption is well over $12 million, so your mother won't owe anything. You'll want to be aware that your cost basis would be her original purchase price, not current market value, so if you ever sell, you'd owe capital gains on the difference. But that's a future problem. And the tenants? The lease transfers with the property. You'd become their landlord. You'd want to review the existing lease, make sure insurance is current, set up a proper management structure. I can refer you to a property management company if you don't want to handle it yourself. I sat there in Ellen's office, surrounded by filing cabinets and framed diplomas, and I felt the absurdity of the moment. Here I was, treating my mother's gift like a business acquisition, running due diligence on an act of generosity. And I couldn't stop, because due diligence was the only tool I had. If I stopped analyzing, I'd have to start feeling, and I wasn't ready for that. Ellen must have sensed something, because she put down her pen and looked at me directly. Marcus, can I ask you something that's none of my business? Sure. Do you want the apartment? I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. I wanted the apartment. I didn't want the apartment. I wanted to refuse it on principle, to maintain the clean narrative of my life. Father gave, mother didn't. I wanted to accept it and feel nothing, to prove that her gesture came too late to matter. I wanted to accept it and feel everything, to crack open 40 years of carefully maintained distance and see what was underneath. I don't know, I said. Ellen nodded. That's an honest answer. Take your time. The apartment isn't going anywhere. Update 3. 5 weeks later. I went to see her. I want to be clear about what this cost me, emotionally. I drove to my mother's current apartment, a different unit, a one-bedroom she rents in Church Hill, on a Saturday morning. Isla was with Danielle for the weekend. I had no obligations, no excuses, no escape routes. Just me and my Honda Accord and a stomach full of coffee and dread. Gloria's building was a converted row house, 3 stories, the brick darkened with age but solid. I'd been there once before, maybe 5 years ago, to drop off some paperwork related to my father's estate. I'd stayed 11 minutes. I'd counted. She buzzed me up. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, small, tidy, filled with the kind of furniture that suggested someone who cared about order but not style. A beige couch. A wooden coffee table with a single coaster placed precisely in the center. Curtains that were functional but not decorative. On the wall above the television, a framed photograph I'd never seen. Me, maybe 8 years old, in a Little League uniform, grinning at the camera with a gap where my left canine should have been. I stared at that photo for what felt like a full minute before Gloria said, "Sit down, Marcus." She looked older. Of course she did. She was 69, and the last time I'd seen her, she was 66. But it wasn't just time. She moved more carefully, favoring her right knee. Her hair, once a thick dark brown she wore in a braid, was shorter now, mostly gray, cut close to her head in a way that made her look both severe and fragile. She brought me coffee without asking. Black, no sugar. She didn't know how I took my coffee because she'd never asked, but by coincidence or luck, she got it right. We sat across from each other, me on the beige couch, her in a straight-backed chair by the window, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was the silence of 2 people who had never learned each other's language trying to find a common word. "I talked to a lawyer," I said finally. "The transfer is clean." She nodded. "I know. I had my own attorney look at it." "You have an attorney?" "I'm 69 years old, Marcus. I have a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. I'm not careless." There was a sharpness in her voice that I recognized. Not anger, exactly, but the reflex of a woman who'd spent her whole life being underestimated and had learned to preemptively correct it. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. I hadn't planned to be that direct, but the question came out the way a splinter works its way to the surface, not because you choose it, but because the body insists. Gloria looked at me. Her eyes were brown, like mine. I'd known that my whole life, but sitting there, 3 feet from her, I noticed it as if for the first time. "Because it's yours," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Mom, you were not there. You know that. I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's the foundation of everything between us. You were not there, and Dad was, and I built my whole life on that fact. And now you're handing me a $300,000 apartment and saying, because it's yours, and I need more than that. I need to understand." She was quiet for a long time. I watched her hands. She was holding her coffee cup with both palms wrapped around it, and her fingers were trembling slightly, whether from age or emotion, I couldn't tell. "I was 25 when I had you," she said. I didn't know how to be a mother. My mother didn't know how to be a mother. Her mother probably didn't either. It goes back, Marcus. It goes back further than I can trace. Lots of people have bad childhoods and still show up for their kids. Yes, they do. And I didn't. That's true. I'm not here to argue with what's true. She set her coffee down on the coaster, precisely, deliberately, the way she did everything. After Leonard and I separated, I told myself you were better off with him. And you were. He was a better parent than I ever could have been. But I also told myself that because it was easier than trying and failing. It was easier to be absent than to be inadequate. So you chose easy. I chose survival. It's not the same thing, even though it looks the same from the outside. I didn't respond to that. I couldn't. Because she was right, and I hated that she was right, because it complicated the story I'd been telling myself for 4 decades. "The apartment," she continued. "I bought it in 2003 with settlement money from a workplace injury. Slipped on a wet floor in the cafeteria. Ironic, I know. Fractured my wrist and tore a ligament in my shoulder. The school district settled for $87,000. I used most of it for the down payment and paid off the mortgage in 2014. I didn't know any of that. You didn't ask. I didn't tell. We're both responsible for the distance, Marcus. Not equally, I know that. But we're both on this road." That landed harder than I expected. I felt something behind my sternum that might have been grief or might have been recognition, the sudden, unwanted awareness that my mother was not a villain. She was a damaged person who had made choices I couldn't forgive but was beginning, very slowly, to understand. I want you to have the apartment because it's the only significant thing I've ever built, she said. And when I'm gone, which won't be tomorrow, but won't be never, I want there to be something that proves I existed in your life. Even if it's just a building. Even if it's just a piece of paper with both our names on it. I sat there on her beige couch with my black coffee growing cold, and I didn't say anything for a long time. Outside, I could hear traffic on the street, someone playing music from a car stereo, the ordinary sounds of a Saturday in Richmond. Okay, I said finally. I'll take it. She nodded once, the way you nod when a contract is finalized. Then she said, quietly, almost as an afterthought, "You were a beautiful child, Marcus. I want you to know that." I noticed, even when it didn't look like I was paying attention. I noticed. I left 20 minutes later. I sat in my car for a long time before I could drive. My hands were shaking, and I gripped the steering wheel until they stopped. Update 4. 3 months later. The transfer went through in mid-October. Ellen Yates handled the paperwork. Gloria and I met at the recorder's office, a surprisingly mundane setting for what felt, internally, like an earthquake. We signed the quitclaim deed. The clerk stamped it. And just like that, I owned a 2-bedroom apartment in the Fan District. I kept the tenants, a couple in their late 20s, both nurses at VCU Medical Center. Good tenants, quiet, on time with rent, respectful of the property. I hired a property management company Rena recommended, a small outfit out of Midlothian that charged 8% of monthly rent. They handled maintenance calls, inspections, lease renewals. The $1,400 monthly rent, minus management fees and my set-aside for repairs and taxes, netted me roughly $900 a month in passive income. I put every penny into a 529 plan for Isla's college fund. When I told Danielle about the apartment, we co-parent well, despite the divorce, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's a big deal, Marcus." "It's real estate," I said, deflecting. "No. I mean your mom giving you something. That's a big deal." Danielle was right, and I knew it, and I spent the next several weeks sitting with that knowledge the way you sit with a bruise, aware of it constantly, prodding it occasionally, not sure whether you want it to heal or not. I started calling Gloria. Not often, every couple of weeks, maybe. Short calls. 5 minutes, 10 at most. We talked about the weather, about Isla. Gloria asked careful, tentative questions, like someone learning a new language, about the apartment's maintenance needs, about nothing of consequence. But we talked. For the first time in my adult life, we had a rhythm, however faint. In November, I brought Isla to meet her. I'd been agonizing over this decision for weeks. Was it too soon? Was I setting my daughter up for disappointment? Was I letting Gloria into a space she hadn't earned? But Isla had been asking about Grandma Gloria with the straightforward curiosity of a 12-year-old, and I decided that my daughter deserved to make her own assessments. They met at a diner in Carytown, neutral territory. Gloria wore a blue cardigan and had clearly had her hair done. Isla, who has her mother's social confidence, walked right up and said, "Hi, Grandma Gloria. Dad says you like your coffee black. So do I, but Mom says I'm too young." Gloria looked at Isla, and something happened to her face. It was subtle, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of the lips, but I recognized it because I'd spent 44 years watching for any flicker of emotion from this woman. It was wonder. Pure, unguarded wonder. "You look like your father did at your age," Gloria said. "Except you're clearly smarter." Isla grinned. "Obviously." They talked for an hour. Gloria asked Isla about school, about her friends, about whether she liked math, she does, and whether she liked reading, she loves it. Isla asked Gloria about her job at the school cafeteria, about what Richmond was like in the old days, about whether she'd ever traveled anywhere exciting. "I went to New York once," Gloria said. "In 1982. I saw the Statue of Liberty and thought she looked tired." Isla laughed. "So did I. I don't think I'd ever heard my mother make a joke before." Update 5. 8 months later. It's June now. The dogwoods have come and gone, and Richmond is settling into the thick, heavy heat that makes everything feel slower and more deliberate. The apartment is doing well. The tenants renewed their lease at $1,475 a month, a modest increase that the management company suggested and the tenants accepted without complaint. Isla's 529 plan has grown to just over $14,000. I've started thinking about long-term plans for the property. Eventual renovations, potential appreciation, maybe a refinance down the line if I want to purchase a second unit. My father would have liked this. He was a practical man who believed in tangible assets, things you could touch, maintain, pass down. The apartment is that kind of asset. It's brick and plaster and aging plumbing, but it's real, and it generates something modest and reliable, like my father himself. Gloria moved into the senior housing complex in Short Pump in January. It's a clean, well-maintained facility, not a nursing home, but an independent living community with shared amenities and optional meal plans. She seems settled there. Content might be too strong a word, but settled. We talk every Sunday now. The calls have gotten longer, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes more. She told me about her childhood, in pieces, the way you share a story that still hurts to hold in its entirety. Her father's drinking. Her mother's exhaustion. The silence that filled their house like a gas, invisible and suffocating. She told me she dropped out of high school at 16 and got her GED at 22, the same year she met my father. Leonard saw something in me I couldn't see in myself, she said once. I've spent most of my life trying to figure out what it was. I told her it was strength. She went quiet for a long time after that. I don't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever, not in the clean, complete way that word implies. Forgiveness suggests a resolution, a closing of the book, and this book is still being written. But I've stopped needing her to be the villain of my story. She's something more complicated than that, a woman who was broken in ways I'm only beginning to understand, who made choices I can't endorse but can, with effort, contextualize. The apartment on Birch Street is in my name now. It generates income that will help my daughter go to college. It sits in a neighborhood I drive through sometimes on my way home from work, and when I pass it, I think about the fact that it was built with settlement money from an injury my mother sustained while serving food to schoolchildren. There's a poetry in that I'm not sure she intended, but that I notice anyway. Last Sunday, at the end of our call, Gloria said something she'd never said before. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost tentative, as if she were testing the weight of the words before releasing them. I'm proud of the man you became, Marcus. Leonard did that. But I'm proud. I held the phone against my ear and closed my eyes and breathed. I didn't say, thank you. I didn't say, it's too late. I didn't say any of the things I've rehearsed over 4 decades of imaginary conversations with the mother I wished I'd had. Instead, I said, same time next Sunday? Same time, she said. And we hung up, and I stood in my kitchen with the afternoon light coming through the window, and I thought about load-bearing walls. How sometimes, when you remove one, the whole structure doesn't collapse. Sometimes it opens up into a room you didn't know was there. A room with light. A room with space. A room that was waiting, all along, for you to be ready to walk into it. Edit. Thank you all for the responses. I didn't expect this to resonate with so many people. For those of you dealing with similar situations, estranged parents, complicated gifts, the weight of family history, I don't have advice. I only have this. The story you tell yourself about your life is important, but it's not the only story. Sometimes the truest thing you can do is let someone add a chapter you didn't plan for. And Isla, if you ever read this years from now, the college fund is real, kid. Your grandmother built it. Your grandfather would have been proud. And your dad is figuring it out, one Sunday phone call at a time.